From the window above, he saw his daughter kneeling on the floor, cleaning glass alongside the janitor. It wasn't the scene itself that disarmed him, but the gentleness with which she protected her wounded hands. While the son displayed arrogance, the daughter offered compassion, and that struck him deeply. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, Robert Miller stood at the 12th floor window of his office, the steaming coffee forgotten in his hands. Down below in the mansion's garden, an unusual scene caught his eye. His daughter Claire, dressed in a designer outfit that cost more than what many Americans make in a month, was kneeling on the marble floor of the veranda. Beside her, Mary Johnson, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 13 years, held her injured hands while Claire carefully picked up the shards of a shattered crystal vase. The 52-year-old businessman felt something strange stir in his chest. It wasn't normal to see the heiress of the Miller fortune acting this way. Claire had always been different from her brother Michael, more sensitive, but this kindness went beyond what Robert considered appropriate for someone of her social standing. Claire took a handkerchief from her pocket and gently dabbed a cut on Mary's hand. The 48-year-old woman, thin with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, tried to pull away, clearly embarrassed by the situation. But Claire insisted, holding her hands carefully and whispering something that made the housekeeper's eyes well up with tears. Robert frowned. Mary Johnson was an exemplary employee, always discreet, efficient, and nearly invisible in the household's routine. She worked 6 days a week, from 7 in the morning to 5 in the evening, taking care of the cleaning and organization of the 10,000-square-foot mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She had never caused any trouble, never complained about her salary, never missed a single day of work. The scene continued below. Claire had convinced Mary to sit on one of the garden benches and was now cleaning up the shards herself, completely ignoring the fact that this was not her role. Robert watched as his daughter worked meticulously, checking for every piece of glass, ensuring nothing was left in the path of anyone passing by. A sharp movement at the door made him turn. Michael, his 26-year-old son, strode into the office with his characteristic arrogance, his Italian suit impeccable, and his face tight with irritation. "Dad, I need to talk to you about that incompetent employee," Michael said, adjusting his silk tie. "Mary dropped a priceless vase on the veranda, and now she's pretending to be hurt to get sympathy. I think it's time we let her go." Robert felt his blood run cold. He glanced out the window again and saw Claire still tending to Mary, who was now crying silently on the garden bench. The difference between his two children had always been stark, but at that moment it became painful to watch. "Did you see what happened?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I saw enough," Michael replied with disdain. "She was carrying the vase carelessly and dropped it. Probably distracted as usual. These people have no concept of the value of things." Robert clenched his fists. Michael's coldness, speaking of Mary as if she were a defective object, deeply disturbed him. Since childhood, his adopted son had shown a casual cruelty towards the staff that Robert preferred to ignore, believing it was just a phase that would pass with maturity. "The vase can be replaced," Robert said calmly. "People can't." Michael let out a dry laugh. "Of course it can be replaced, but let's not pretend it was an accident. This woman has been in our house for years and has never understood her place. Always too bold, too present. A good housekeeper should be invisible." Michael's words echoed in the office like a slap. Robert remembered how Mary had come into his life 13 years ago, desperate, asking for help for her starving young son. At the time, Robert had just become a widower, and Claire, then 11, needed a female figure in the house. The solution had seemed perfect: adopt the boy and keep the mother on as an employee. Now, watching the scene in the garden, Robert began to question if that decision had truly been wise. Claire continued to care for Mary with a tenderness that seemed natural, as if there were a connection between them that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Michael's voice brought him back to the present. "I'm listening perfectly," Robert answered, his voice thick with a tension he couldn't hide. "And the answer is no. Mary Johnson will not be fired." Michael's face twisted in surprise and anger. "What do you mean, no? Dad, you're being sentimental. She's just an employee." "Just an employee," Robert repeated, the words tasting like poison. "Michael, that woman has dedicated 13 years of her life to this house and this family. She deserves more respect than you're showing." Michael crossed his arms, clearly annoyed at having his authority questioned. Since taking over part of the family business, he expected his opinions to be accepted without argument, especially on matters he considered minor, like the household staff. "Respect is earned, Dad. And an employee who breaks valuable antiques deserves nothing but to be fired." Robert looked out the window again. Claire had finished cleaning up the shards and was now walking with Mary toward the house, gently holding the older woman's arm. There was something in his daughter's posture that intrigued him, a familiarity he couldn't explain. Suddenly an old memory hit him like a lightning bolt. Claire had always been close to Mary, ever since she was little. She would spend hours in the kitchen listening to the stories the housekeeper told about her life back in rural Kentucky. She would defend Mary when other staff members complained about her supposed presumption. She insisted that the woman sit at the table during meals, an invitation Mary always politely refused. Robert had never paid enough attention to those details, always too busy with business and the pressure of maintaining the corporate empire he had built. Now, however, each memory seemed to carry a new weight, a meaning he had been too blind to see. "Michael," Robert said slowly, "have you ever stopped to think that maybe you don't know Mary Johnson as well as you think you do?" The young man rolled his eyes. "Dad, please. She's a housekeeper. What is there to know? She cleans the house, gets her paycheck and goes home. Simple as that." Robert felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. For years he had allowed Michael to treat Mary with contempt, believing it was important to maintain well-defined social hierarchies. Now he realized he might have created a monster. The two figures disappeared from his view as they entered the house. Robert imagined Claire taking Mary to the kitchen, making her some tea, tending to her wounds with the gentleness of a nurse. The image both moved and disturbed him. "I'm going to talk to Mary," Robert announced, heading for the door. "Dad, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't lower yourself to—" "Michael." Robert's voice cut through the air with an authority that made his son fall silent immediately. "I never want to hear you use the words lower yourself to refer to a conversation with any employee in this house again. Is that clear?" Michael stood in silence, clearly stunned by his father's reaction. Robert had never been so direct in his criticism, preferring to keep the family peace over confronting his son's problematic behaviors. Robert opened the door, but before leaving he turned one last time. "And Michael, the cost of the broken vase will come out of your salary this month. Maybe then you'll learn to value objects as much as the people who take care of them." The look of shock on Michael's face was the last thing Robert saw before closing the door behind him, leaving behind a silence heavy with tension and questions that were finally beginning to demand answers. Robert descended the mansion's marble staircase with slow steps, his heart beating irregularly. Each step seemed to echo with memories he had buried deep over the years. When he reached the kitchen, he found Claire sitting at the table with Mary, gently holding the older woman's hand while cleaning the cuts with hydrogen peroxide. "Dad?" Claire looked up, surprised to see him in the kitchen. Robert rarely came down to the ground floor of the house, preferring to stay in his office or the library. "Claire, I need to speak with Mary alone," Robert said, his voice softer than he intended. Claire hesitated for a moment, looking worriedly at Mary, who had become visibly tense at her employer's arrival. "It's okay, Mary. I'll finish taking care of your cuts later." When Claire left, Robert pulled up a chair and sat across from Mary. The woman kept her eyes downcast, her trembling hands resting on her blood-stained apron. Strands of grey hair escaped her bun, framing a face marked by years of hard work and silent worries. "Mary, tell me what happened with the vase?" Robert asked gently. "It was an accident, Mr. Miller," Mary answered in a low voice. "I was cleaning the veranda when I slipped. The vase was very heavy, and I couldn't hold on to it. I'm so sorry. I know it was a valuable piece." Robert watched Mary's face closely. There was something in her eyes, a deep sadness that went far beyond the embarrassment of having broken an expensive object. It was the expression of someone who carried old pains, wounds that had never fully healed. "The vase doesn't matter," Robert said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I'm worried about you. Your hands are hurt." Mary looked up quickly as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. In 13 years of working in that house, Robert had never shown any personal concern for her. He treated her with professional courtesy, paid her on time, offered adequate benefits, but always maintained the distance he considered appropriate between an employer and an employee. "I'm fine, sir. Claire already took care of the cuts. She's always been so kind to me." The mention of his daughter made Robert lean forward. "Mary, how long have you known Claire?" "Since she was a little girl, sir. When I started working here, she was 11. She was always a special child, different from the other rich kids I'd known. She never treated me like I was invisible." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. He vaguely remembered how Claire used to spend time in the kitchen in the first few years after his wife's death. At the time, he had thought it was just a phase, a way of coping with the loss. Now he realized there might have been something deeper in that connection. "And Michael?" Robert asked, though he already knew. He wouldn't like the answer. Mary hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Michael, he's always been different from Claire, more distant." Robert knew Mary well enough to know that distant was a generous euphemism. Over the years, Michael had developed a casual contempt for the staff that Robert had thought was just immaturity. Now he was beginning to realize he had been far more permissive with this behavior than he should have been. "Mary, may I ask you a personal question?" Robert hesitated before continuing. "Do you have a family? Children?" Mary's face visibly paled. Her hands began to tremble more intensely, and she had to rest them on the table to steady herself. Her eyes filled with tears that she tried to hold back, but without success. I had a son, sir," she answered in a broken voice. "But it was a long time ago." "Had?" Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "I gave him to a good family when he was still little. I couldn't afford to raise him on my own. It was what was best for him." Mary's words echoed in the kitchen like exploding bombs. Robert felt the world spin around him, fragmented memories, starting to fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The date, the age, the desperate situation of a single mother seeking help for her son. "How old was he?" Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. 13 when I gave him up. Today, he would be 26. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert could feel the blood pulsing in his temples, the cruel reality imposing itself over years of lies he himself had constructed. Michael was exactly 26. Michael, who despised Mary. Michael, who treated her as if she were less than nothing. Michael, who had just suggested her dismissal with calculated coldness. "Mary," Robert said slowly, "what was your son's name?" The woman looked up, and Robert saw in her eyes a painful recognition. She knew. She had always known. And she had spent 13 years working in the house, indirectly caring for the son she had given away, being humiliated by him daily. "Michael," Mary whispered, the tears finally escaping. "My son's name is Michael Johnson Miller." Robert felt his legs give way. He leaned on the table, trying to process the magnitude of what he had done. When Mary had appeared in his office 13 years ago, desperate and begging for help, he had thought he was doing a noble deed. He would adopt the boy, give him a quality education, opportunities that Mary could never offer. And so, that she wouldn't completely lose contact with her son, he had offered her a job in the house. At the time, it had seemed like the perfect solution. Michael would grow up as a miller, with all the advantages of wealth and social position. Mary could watch him grow up close, even if he never knew the truth. Robert had thought he was protecting everyone involved. Now he realized the inherent cruelty of that arrangement. Mary had spent years watching her son grow up without being able to hug him, without being able to comfort him when he was sad, without being able to celebrate his achievements. Worse still, she had watched Michael turn into someone who despised her, who spoke of her as if she were a disposable object. "Why did you never tell me anything?" Robert asked, his voice laden with guilt. "Because I made a deal with you, sir," Mary replied, drying her tears with her apron. "You said it would be better for Michael if he never knew the truth, that he could grow up without the weight of coming from poverty. I believed you were right." Robert closed his eyes, the weight of responsibility crushing his chest. He had been arrogant to think he could decide on his own what was best for everyone. He had created a situation where a mother had become a prisoner of her own generosity, watching helplessly as her son pushed her away without even knowing who she really was. "And Claire?" Robert asked, a terrible suspicion growing in his mind. "Does she know?" Mary shook her head, but there was hesitation in her movements. "No, sir, I never told anyone, but Claire has always been intuitive. Sometimes I get the feeling she senses something, even without understanding what it is." Robert thought of the scene he had witnessed in the garden, of the gentleness with which Claire had treated Mary, of the natural familiarity between them. Had his daughter noticed something he himself had refused to see? At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Michael appeared at the kitchen entrance, his face contorted with anger and impatience. His eyes went straight to Mary, still sitting at the table with her bandaged hands. "Dad, what are you doing here? I thought you were going to fire her, not console her," Michael said with disdain. Robert looked at his adopted son, seeing for the first time not just the arrogance he had always noticed, but also the facial features that mirrored Mary's, the shape of the eyes, the line of the nose, the curve of the lips. How had he been so blind for so long? "Michael," Robert said slowly, "I need you to sit down." "Dad, I don't have time for—" "Sit down." The authority in Robert's voice made Michael obey reluctantly, pulling a chair to the opposite side of the table, as far away from Mary as possible. Robert looked at Mary, who had grown even paler with Michael's arrival. The woman was trembling visibly, her hands clutching her apron as if it were a protective shield. Her eyes couldn't leave her son's face, memorizing every detail as if trying to reclaim all the lost moments in a single glance. "There's something you both need to know," Robert began, feeling the weight of the words that were about to leave his mouth. Something. That should have been said a long time ago. Michael rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed that his afternoon was being interrupted by this conversation he considered unnecessary. Mary, on the other hand, held her breath, knowing that the moment she had feared for 13 years had finally arrived. Robert took a deep breath, looked at Mary one last time for a silent confirmation, and received an almost imperceptible nod. There was no longer any way to postpone the truth he had kept hidden for so long. "Michael," Robert began, the words coming out with difficulty, "Mary isn't just our employee, she's your biological mother." The silence that followed was devastating. Michael blinked several times as if he couldn't process what he had heard. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, pure horror. "This is some kind of sick joke," Michael said, his voice trembling. "Dad, this isn't funny." "It's not a joke, Michael," Robert replied, each word as heavy as lead. 13 years ago, Mary came to my office asking for help. You were a 13-year-old boy in need. She couldn't afford to raise you on her own." Michael looked at Mary, who remained, with her eyes downcast, tears streaming silently down her face. The realization began to slowly seep into his mind, like poison spreading through his bloodstream. "No," Michael whispered, getting up abruptly from his chair. "No, that's a lie. My mother died when I was a baby. You told me that 1,000 times." "I lied," Robert admitted, the guilt crushing his chest. "I thought it would be easier for you to grow up without carrying the weight of your origins." Michael began to pace back and forth in the kitchen, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. His breathing was rapid, almost gasping. "You're telling me that this woman," he pointed at Mary without looking at her directly, "is my mother? And that I spent 13 years treating her like trash," Robert completed bitterly. "Yes, Michael. You spent years humiliating your own mother." Mary finally raised her head, her red-rimmed eyes meeting Michael's for the first time since he had entered the kitchen. "Michael, Don't," Michael shouted, recoiling as if she were a ghost. "Don't call me by that name. You don't have the right." The pain on Mary's face was like a stab to Robert's heart. The woman shrank in her chair as if trying to disappear completely. "Why?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me treat you that way if you're... "Because that's what I asked of her," Robert interrupted. "I made Mary promise she would never tell the truth. I said it would be better for you." Michael laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Better? Better for who, Dad? For me? For her? Or for you, who didn't want to deal with the complexity of the situation?" The accusation hit Robert squarely because it was true. He had created that arrangement thinking of himself as much as the others, wanting to maintain control over the situation, shaping it to his convenience. "All these years," Michael muttered, the reality crashing down on him like an avalanche. "All the times I humiliated her, talked about her like she was nothing, suggested you fire her." He stopped pacing and looked at Mary, who continued to cry silently. "God, what have I done?" "Michael," Mary said softly, finding the courage to speak, "you didn't know. It wasn't your fault." "Not my fault?" Michael yelled again. "I said, you should be invisible. I said people like you had no value. I treated my own mother like she was an animal." Robert watched Michael's agony with a broken heart. His son was being forced to confront years of cruel behavior, realizing he had directed his contempt at the person who loved him most in the world. "Why did you accept this?" Michael asked Mary, his voice full of desperation. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? Why did you let me be so horrible to you?" Mary wiped her tears with the sleeve of her apron, trying to find the right words. "Because I loved you too much to ruin your life. Mr. Miller gave me a chance to be near you, to watch you grow up, even from a distance. It was better than nothing." "Better than nothing?" Michael slammed his fist on the table, making Mary flinch. "You think it was better to watch me turn into a monster? You'd rather see me treat you like scum than have a son who knew his origins?" "I wanted you to have all the opportunities I could never give you," Mary answered, her voice breaking. "Education, money, social standing. I thought if you knew the truth, if you knew you came from poverty, it would limit your dreams." Michael let out a cruel laugh. "Limit my dreams? My dreams are based on stepping on people. My dreams are built on contempt for the poor, for workers, for people exactly like you." Robert saw the exact moment Mary's heart broke. The woman lowered her head again, her shoulders shaking with sobs she tried to contain. "Michael, stop," Robert said firmly. "Your anger should be directed at me, not her." "My anger is directed at all of you," Michael exploded. "You decided my life behind my back. You turned me into a horrible person and then act surprised when I find out the truth." At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Claire appeared at the kitchen entrance, clearly alarmed by the shouting. She looked around, trying to understand the scene. Robert tense, Michael agitated, and Mary crying. "What is going on here?" Claire asked, rushing to Mary's side. "Why is she crying? Michael, what did you do?" "What did I do?" Michael laughed bitterly. "Claire, you want to know what I did? I spent 13 years mistreating our housekeeper without knowing she's my biological mother." Claire froze mid-motion, her eyes widening. "What?" "You heard me," Michael continued, his voice full of venom. "Our dear Mary, the woman you always defended, is my mother, and our father thought it would be fun to keep it a secret while I treated her like garbage." Claire looked at Robert, searching for a denial that didn't come. Then she looked at Mary, who confirmed with an almost imperceptible nod. Claire's face went through a series of emotions, shock, understanding, and finally a kind of painful enlightenment. "That's why," Claire whispered, more to herself than to the others. "That's why you always took special care of me, why you always had that motherly way with me. You saw me as your son's sister." Mary nodded, unable to speak. Claire knelt beside Mary's chair and held her injured hands. "All these years, you loved us without being able to show who you really were." Claire's gentleness contrasted brutally with Michael's cruelty, making the situation even more painful. Michael watched the scene with a mixture of envy and self-loathing. His adopted sister had managed to form a genuine bond with Mary without even knowing who she really was, while he had wasted years being cruel to his own mother. "This is nauseating," Michael said, his voice thick with bitterness. "You're all acting like this is some happy ending. It's not. It's a tragedy that's lasted for 13 years. "Michael," Claire said softly, "you can change this. You can start to—" "Start what?" Michael interrupted. "Pretend we're a happy family. Pretend I didn't spend years telling my mother she was insignificant. Pretend I didn't suggest Dad fire her this morning." Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "You did what? Oh, you didn't know?" Michael laughed cruelly. "This morning I came to your office specifically to ask you to fire Mary. I said she was incompetent, that she didn't deserve to work here." Mary made a choked sound, as if she had been physically assaulted. Claire squeezed her hands tighter, trying to offer some comfort. "And you know what the most ironic part is?" Michael continued, his voice full of self-destruction. "I was right about one thing. I really don't deserve a mother like her." With those words, Michael stormed out of the kitchen, leaving behind a heavy silence and 3 broken hearts. Robert looked at Mary, who was crying openly in Claire's arms, and realized that his decision to protect everyone had resulted in the destruction of everyone. The sound of the front door slamming violently echoed through the mansion, followed by the roar of a car engine speeding away. Michael was gone, and Robert had no idea when or if he would be back. "Dad," Claire said softly, her voice full of tears, "how did we get to this point?" Robert had no answer. All that remained was the devastating weight of his choices and the certainty that it might be too late to fix what he had broken. 3 days passed with no word from Michael. Robert had made dozens of calls to his son's cell phone, all going straight to voicemail. He had sent Charles, the family driver, to check the apartment he kept downtown, but the doorman said Michael hadn't been there since the previous weekend. Mary hadn't been able to work since the revelation. She remained in her staff quarters, staring at the wall with empty eyes, refusing to eat or speak. Claire tried to comfort her, bringing tea and soup that sat untouched on the small table beside her bed. Robert walked through the house like a ghost, haunted by the magnitude of his arrogance. Every room in the mansion seemed to echo with painful memories. The office where he had architected that cruel lie, the dining room where Michael had humiliated Mary countless times, the kitchen where the truth had finally exploded like a bomb. On the morning of the 4th day, Claire found Robert in his office, still wearing the previous day's clothes, surrounded by empty whiskey glasses and scattered papers. "Dad, you need to eat something," Claire said softly, placing a tray with coffee and toast on his desk. "I can't," Robert mumbled, massaging his temples. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Michael's face when he found out the truth, the way he looked at Mary, as if she were to blame for something that wasn't her choice," Claire finished, sitting in the armchair across from her father's desk. Robert looked up at his daughter. At 24, Claire had always shown an emotional maturity he had attributed to the early loss of her mother. Now he realized it might be something deeper, a natural sensitivity that allowed her to see beyond appearances. "Claire, I need to ask you something," Robert said hesitantly. "You always knew, didn't you, about Mary and Michael?" Claire looked away, confirming her father's suspicions. "Not exactly, but I always felt there was something special about the way Mary cared for Michael, even when he treated her badly. It was like she loved him in a way that went beyond professional duty." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because it wasn't my place to uncover secrets that were clearly meant to stay hidden," Claire replied, looking directly at her father. "But now I realize maybe I should have?" Robert closed his eyes, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. "I thought I was protecting everyone. Michael would have a better life, Mary could watch him grow, and you could maintain control over the situation," Claire said gently, but without absolving him. "Dad, your intentions may have been good, but you made decisions about other people's lives without truly considering them." Before Robert could respond, the doorbell rang through the house. Claire stood up to answer, but Robert stopped her with a gesture. Maybe it was Michael. Maybe there was a chance to fix things. However, when Robert opened the door, he found two men in dark suits he didn't recognize. The taller one presented a badge. "Mr. Robert Miller, I'm Detective Evans from the 14th Precinct. This is Investigator Peterson. Can we talk about your son, Michael?" Robert's blood ran cold. What happened to him? "Your son was involved in a car accident last night," the detective explained, stepping into the house as Robert made way. "He's physically okay, but there were complications." "What kind of complications?" Robert asked, his heart racing. Michael was clearly agitated when he lost control of the vehicle. There was no alcohol in his system, but witnesses reported he was driving erratically as if he were distraught. The car flipped on the FDR drive. Robert leaned against the wall, trying to process the information. "Where is he now?" "At Mount Sinai Hospital. But Mr. Miller, there's something else. When Michael regained consciousness, he refused to speak with any family members. He specifically said he didn't want to see you or a woman named Mary." Claire, who had come downstairs to join the conversation, let out a choked sound. "Is he okay? Is he seriously hurt?" "Scrapes and a fractured wrist," Investigator Peterson replied. "Nothing life-threatening. But we're concerned about his psychological state. He said some troubling things to the medical team." "What kind of things?" Robert asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The detective hesitated before answering. "Your son said he didn't deserve to be alive, that he had spent years being cruel to the one person who truly loved him. The medical team has requested a psychiatric evaluation." Robert felt the world collapse around him. Michael wasn't just physically injured, he was emotionally shattered by the revelation of the truth. The guilt Robert carried multiplied 1,000-fold. "Can I see him?" Robert asked, knowing the answer was likely no. "He was very specific about not wanting visitors from the family," the detective replied. "But there's one strange thing. He asked to speak with someone named Claire, but only her." Claire turned to her father, her eyes full of tears. "I have to go to him." "Claire, I don't know if that's a good idea," Robert said, worried about what Michael might say or do in his emotional state. "Dad, he's my brother. Even if he's not biological, he's my family. And maybe I'm the only person who can help him right now." Robert knew Claire was right. She had always been the bridge between Michael and the rest of the family, the only one who could reach his more human side. After the police left, Claire got ready to go to the hospital. Before leaving, she went up to the staff quarters to speak with Mary, who was still motionless in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Mary, I need to tell you something," Claire said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Michael was in a car accident." Mary sat up immediately, her face pale with terror. "Is he okay? Is he hurt? I need to see him." "He's physically okay," Claire reassured her, holding Mary's hands. "But he doesn't want to see anyone from the family. Except me." Mary lowered her head, despair evident in every line of her face. "It's my fault. If I had never given him up, if I had found a way to raise him, none of this would have happened." "It's not your fault," Claire said firmly. "You did what you thought was best for him at the time. No one could have predicted things would turn out this way." "He hates me," Mary whispered. "My own son hates me, and I deserve it." Claire held Mary's face between her hands, forcing her to look into her eyes. "Michael doesn't hate you. He hates himself for how he treated you. There's a difference." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know him. Because despite all his flaws, Michael has a heart. It's just buried under years of lies and wrong behavior." Mary cried silently, clinging to Claire as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had completely fallen apart. "I'm going to talk to him," Claire promised. "I'm going to try to make him understand that there's still time to fix things." "What if he won't forgive me? What if it's too late?" Claire had no answer for that. She couldn't guarantee that Michael would be able to overcome the guilt and self-loathing he was feeling, but she had to try. An hour later, Claire was in the hospital corridor, watching Michael through the window of his room. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. The cast on his wrist and the cuts on his face told only part of the story. It was the empty expression in his eyes that truly scared her. When she entered the room, Michael turned his head toward her, but said nothing. The silence stretched for long minutes before Claire found the courage to speak. "How are you feeling?" "Like a monster," Michael answered, his voice hoarse and broken. "Like someone who spent 13 years humiliating his own mother and only found out the truth when he suggested she be fired." Claire approached the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Michael, you're not a monster. You were raised, believing a lie. You didn't know who Mary really was." "That's no excuse," Michael said, finally looking at Claire. "Even if she was just an employee, I shouldn't have treated anyone that way. Dad raised me to be cruel, and I embraced that cruelty because it gave me power." Claire saw tears stream down Michael's face, the first time she had seen him cry since they were children. "It's not too late to change," she said softly. "Yes, it is," Michael replied with bitter conviction. "You saw her face when she realized who I really am. There's no coming back from causing that much pain." At that moment, Claire realized that perhaps the greatest tragedy wasn't just the lies Robert had told, but how those lies had shaped Michael into someone incapable of believing in his own capacity for redemption. Claire pulled a chair close to Michael's bed, ignoring the resistance she saw in his eyes. The hospital room was silent, except for the steady beeping of the monitors and the hum of the air conditioning. "Michael, I need you to listen to me," Claire said, her voice firm but gentle. "Mary doesn't hate you. In fact, she's blaming herself for all of this." "How do you know?" Michael asked, still avoiding her gaze. "Because I've spent the last 3 days taking care of her. She can't eat. She can't sleep. She keeps repeating that it's her fault, that she should have found a way to raise you herself." Michael closed his eyes, a look of deep pain washing over his face. "She should have. Anything would have been better than turning me into what I've become." "Michael, do you want to know the real story?" Claire asked, deciding that perhaps the whole truth could help. "The story Dad never told you?" Michael opened his eyes, a spark of curiosity cutting through the curtain of self-loathing. Claire took a deep breath before continuing. "After you left the house, I talked a lot with Mary. She told me how things really happened 13 years ago." "I don't want to hear excuses," Michael muttered. "They're not excuses. They're facts you deserve to know." Claire shifted in her chair, preparing for a difficult conversation. "Mary was 19 when she got pregnant with you. The father was a 20-year-old guy who ran off as soon as he found out." Michael remained silent, but Claire could see he was listening. "She worked until she was 8 months pregnant as a cleaner in downtown office buildings. She didn't make much, but she got by. The problem came after you were born." Claire paused, watching Michael's reaction before continuing. "You were born premature, Michael. You spent 3 months in the NICU. Mary sold everything she had to pay the hospital bills that her insurance didn't cover. When you finally came home, she found out you had serious respiratory problems." Michael turned his head to Claire, finally looking directly at her. "What kind of problems?" "Severe asthma. You needed expensive medication, constant nebulizer treatments, frequent appointments with a pulmonologist. Mary worked 3 different jobs just to afford your treatment." Claire saw a tear run down Michael's face, but he said nothing. "She kept that up for 4 years, Michael. 4 years of never sleeping more than 3 hours a night, not eating properly, destroying herself to make sure you had the care you needed. Until one day, you had an attack so severe you almost died." "What do you mean, almost died?" Michael's voice was a whisper. "You stopped breathing in the middle of the night. Mary rushed you to the hospital, but the doctor said if she had been 5 minutes later, it would have been too late." Claire leaned forward, taking Michael's uninjured hand. "It was on that day that Mary realized she couldn't save you on her own. That as much as she loved you, her love wasn't enough to keep you alive. She needed help." Michael was crying openly now, all the hatred and resentment being replaced by a deep, complex pain. "She spent weeks looking for a family who could adopt you and ensure you had access to the best doctors, the best treatments. When she heard that Dad had lost his wife and was raising a daughter alone, she thought it would be perfect. How did she know about Dad? Mary worked as a night cleaner in the building where his office was. One night she overheard a phone call where he was talking about you and me, about how hard it was raising a daughter alone after losing his wife." Claire paused to wipe away her own tears before continuing. Mary spent 2 weeks watching Dad from a distance, trying to make sure he would be a good father to you. Only then did she find the courage to approach him. And when she gave me up, Michael asked, his voice broken, she told me you cried for 3 straight days after you came to our house. You refused to eat, you wouldn't sleep, you just cried for her. Dad even considered backing out of the adoption. Michael sobbed, imagining the desperation he must have felt as a 5-year-old child separated from the only person he knew. It was Mary who suggested she work at the house. She told Dad that way you would feel safer, that she could help you with the transition without you knowing who she really was. So from the beginning she knew it would be like this? That she would be my housekeeper? Claire nodded sadly. She thought it would be temporary, that after a few months, once you were settled, she could reveal who she was and maybe have some kind of relationship with you. What changed? Dad. He was afraid the truth would confuse you, hurt you. He convinced Mary it would be better for you to grow up without carrying the burden of your poor origins. Michael slammed his fist on the bed, ignoring the pain that shot through his injured arm. He had no right to make that decision. No, he didn't. But Mary was so grateful that you were alive and healthy that she agreed to any condition he imposed. Silence settled in the room as Michael processed everything he had heard. The narrative he had built about his life, of a child abandoned by an irresponsible mother, was completely crumbling, replaced by the reality of a young woman who had sacrificed everything to keep him alive. "Claire," Michael said after several long minutes, "how many asthma attacks did I have when I was little?" Claire frowned, trying to remember. "A lot, especially in the first few years. Whenever it happened, Mary would be frantic, even while pretending to be just a concerned employee. She knew all your symptoms, all your medications, all the signs that an attack was coming. It was her who took care of me when I was sick," Michael whispered, the memories returning in painful fragments. "Always. Remember that time you had pneumonia, when you were 8? Dad had to travel for an urgent business meeting, but Mary stayed up for 3 straight nights taking care of you." Michael vaguely remembered the feeling of security he felt when he was sick, how someone was always nearby when he woke up scared. He had assumed it was Claire or some hired nanny. "And I never thanked her," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "Worse than that, I treated her like she was an inconvenience. Michael, you were a child, you couldn't have known. But then I grew up and kept treating her badly. I got worse, actually." Claire knew she couldn't deny that. She had watched Michael become increasingly cruel to the staff as he grew older, especially to Mary. "Why do you think that happened?" Claire asked gently. Michael thought for a moment before answering. "Because Dad taught me that being rich meant being superior, that people like my mother were different, inferior. And I wanted so badly to be part of that world, to be accepted as a true Miller, that I embraced that cruelty. And Mary watched you turn into that without being able to do anything to stop it." "God," Michael groaned, covering his face with his free hand. "I can only imagine what she must have felt every time I humiliated her. Watching the son she almost died to save treat her like trash." At that moment, the door to the room opened and a nurse came in to check Michael's vital signs. She worked in silence for a few minutes before turning to Claire. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a lady outside asking about the patient. She said she's a relative, but her name isn't on the approved visitor list." Claire and Michael exchanged a look. They both knew who it was. "What's her name?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "Mary Johnson. She's very upset, said she's his mother." Michael closed his eyes, a new wave of conflicting emotions washing over him. Part of him desperately wanted to see her, to apologize, to hug her, and try to reclaim all the lost years. Another part was too terrified by his own shame and guilt. "Tell her that," Michael started, but his voice failed him. Claire squeezed his hand tighter. "What do you want me to say, Michael?" Michael looked at the door, knowing that on the other side was the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, who had endured years of humiliation just to be near, him who at this very moment was probably destroyed with worry. I don't know if I can face her," Michael admitted, "not after everything I've done." "She loves you, Michael. Unconditionally. She always has. What if it's too late? What if I've caused damage that can't be repaired? Michael remained silent for several long minutes, staring at the hospital room ceiling. Claire could see the internal war he was waging, the desire to see Mary battling the overwhelming fear of confronting his own actions. "Claire," Michael said finally, his voice trembling, "if I agree to see her, will you stay? Here with me?" "Of course I will," Claire replied, gently squeezing his hand. Michael took several deep breaths, as if preparing to dive into deep water. "Okay, you can tell her to come in." Claire got up and went to the door, but before opening it, she turned back to Michael. "Remember what I told you. She loves you. She always has." When the door opened, Mary appeared hesitantly in the doorway. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her hair was disheveled. Her clothes were wrinkled. It was clear she had been up all night, tormented with worry. "Michael," she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched a small plastic bag. Michael's first instinct was to turn to the wall, unable to bear the look of pain in Mary's eyes. But he forced himself to look at her, seeing for the first time not the employee he had despised, but the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. "I brought some fruit," Mary said nervously, holding up the bag. "Apples and bananas. You always liked apples when you were little." The simplicity of the gesture, a mother bringing fruit to her sick son, hit Michael like a punch, to the gut. He vaguely remembered how, when he was sick as a child, peeled apple slices would always appear in his room. He had assumed it was Claire, or some employee following Robert's orders. "It was you," Michael said, his voice breaking. "When I was a kid and got sick, it was you who peeled the fruit and left it in my room." Mary nodded, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "You always had trouble eating when you had a fever. Apples were one of the few things you'd accept. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you ever tell me who you were?" Mary slowly approached the bed, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any moment. "Because your father, because Mr. Miller said it would be better for you, that you could have a life without limitations if you didn't know where you came from. And you agreed to that." Michael's voice had an edge of anger, but it wasn't directed at her. "I was so grateful that you were alive and healthy that I would have agreed to anything," Mary replied, cautiously sitting in the chair Claire had vacated. "When I saw you running around the house in those first few days, breathing normally, laughing with Claire, I thought maybe Robert was right." Michael watched Mary's face closely, noticing for the first time the similarities he had ignored for years. The shape of her eyes, the line of her forehead, the way she furrowed her brow when she was worried. "But you stayed," Michael said. "You could have left after I settled in, but you stayed." "How could I leave?" Mary asked, her voice full of pain. "You were my son. Even if I couldn't hug you or tell you who I was, at least I could see you every day, make sure you were okay." "And I treated you like trash," Michael said, squeezing his eyes shut. "All those years, I treated you like you were nothing." "You didn't know." "Stop making excuses for me," Michael exploded, making Mary shrink back in her chair. "Don't apologize for me because I don't deserve it. Even if you were just an employee, I shouldn't have treated anyone that way." Mary remained silent, watching Michael's agony. She could see he was torturing himself with guilt, just as she had tortured herself for years, questioning if she had made the right choice. "Michael," Mary said softly, "do you want to know what I thought every time you humiliated me?" Michael opened his eyes, looking at her in surprise. He hadn't expected her to bring it up. "I thought, at least he's alive. At least he's strong and healthy and has a future ahead of him. Every humiliation you put me through was a reminder that you had survived." "That's sick," Michael said, horrified. "You shouldn't have had to accept being treated badly just because I was alive." "Maybe it is sick," Mary admitted, "but that's what a mother's love does. It accepts anything, even humiliation, if it means her child is okay." Michael began to cry again, sobs that came from the depths of his soul. "I don't deserve your love. I don't deserve that you sacrificed so much for me." To both their surprise, Mary stood up from the chair and approached the bed. She hesitated for a moment before gently touching Michael's face, wiping away his tears. "You're my son," she said simply. "It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how you treated me. You will always be my son, and I will always love you." Mary's touch, the first affectionate physical contact between mother and son in 13 years, shattered Michael's last defenses. He held her hand against his face, crying like the child he had been when she gave him away. "I'm so sorry," Michael sobbed. "So sorry. I wish I could go back in time and change everything." "I know," Mary whispered, her own tears falling onto her son's face. "I know you are." Claire, who had remained silent in a corner of the room, watched the scene with a broken heart. She could see the pure love between a mother and son trying to survive the destruction caused by years of lies and misunderstandings. "Mom," Michael said, the word feeling foreign in his mouth after years of not saying it. Can I call you Mom?" Mary made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "I've dreamed of this moment for 13 years. "I don't remember calling you that either," Michael admitted, "but I remember your voice. When you would hum around the house, I would always stop to listen, even while pretending I didn't care. Do you remember the lullabies I used to sing when you were little?" Michael closed his eyes, searching his memory. "There was one about a little bird that flew far away but always came home." Mary smiled through her tears. "You always asked for that one when you were scared at night." "Why would I be scared?" "Nightmares. You had frequent nightmares in the first few years after you came to the miller's house. You dreamed you were lost, that you couldn't breathe." Michael felt a stab of understanding. "You would come to my room when I had nightmares, wouldn't you?" "Robert didn't know," Mary admitted. "I would sneak in, sing until you calmed down and leave before anyone noticed." "So you always took care of me," Michael said, the realization hitting him like a wave. "Even when I grew up and became cruel, even when I suggested Dad fire you, you were still taking care of me." "A mother never stops taking care of her child," Mary answered simply. At that moment, the door to the room opened again, and Robert appeared, clearly hesitant. His eyes went straight to Mary and Michael, taking in the intimate moment between mother and son with a mixture of relief and profound guilt. "Sorry to interrupt," Robert said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I wanted to see how you were." Michael looked at Robert with an expression that mixed anger and sadness. "How do you think we are, Dad? We're trying to fix 13 years of damage that you caused." Robert flinched as if he'd been slapped, but he didn't dispute the accusation. "Michael, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did was terrible." "You separated a mother from her son," Michael said, his voice gaining strength. "Worse than that, you turned me into someone who tortured his own mother without knowing it." You thought about yourself," Michael interrupted. "You thought about how it would be more convenient for you to have control over the situation." Robert didn't try to defend himself because he knew Michael was right. He had created that situation, thinking about how it would be easier for him to manage, not what would be best for Mary or Michael. "What do you need from me now?" Robert asked humbly. Michael looked at Mary, then at Claire, and finally back at Robert. "Time," he said. "Time for me to get to know my mother for real. Time for her to forgive me for everything I did. Time for both of us to heal from the damage your lies caused." "And me?" Robert asked, his voice almost a whisper. Michael hesitated before answering. "You're going to have to live with the consequences of what you did, just like the rest of us." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of pain and truths that were finally coming to light. But for the first time since the truth had exploded, there was also something new in the air, the fragile possibility of healing, of rebuilding, of a love that survives even the most destructive lies. 2 weeks later, Michael was discharged from the hospital. His wrist had healed well, but the emotional wounds were still deep and raw. During those days, Mary had visited daily, bringing fruit, books, and stories about his childhood that Michael never knew she knew. Coming home was strange for everyone. The mansion on the Upper East Side felt different, charged with a new, uncomfortable energy. Michael looked at each room with fresh eyes, remembering moments when Mary had been present as a mother disguised as an employee. "Where do you want me to put your things?" Claire asked, carrying Michael's bag up the stairs. "In my room is fine," Michael replied, hesitating halfway up the staircase. "But Claire, I need to ask you something. Where does my mom sleep?" The word mom still sounded strange coming from his mouth, but he was forcing himself to use it, trying to rebuild a relationship that had never had a chance to properly exist. "In the staff quarters, on the ground floor," Claire answered softly. Michael stopped climbing the stairs completely. "She's been sleeping. In the staff quarters for 13 years. Michael, that's where she's always slept. It's comfortable. It has its own bathroom." "No," Michael interrupted, walking back down the steps. "It's not right. She's not an employee anymore. She's my mother." Claire followed Michael as he walked purposefully toward the ground floor. They found Mary in the kitchen, preparing lunch as she always did, but now there was a different tension in the air. Everyone was still learning to navigate the new family reality. "Mom," Michael said, and Mary turned immediately, still surprised every time he used that word. "Yes, Michael. You're moving into one of the guest rooms on the second floor. I don't want you sleeping in the staff quarters anymore." Mary looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "Michael, I'm fine where I am. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Michael said firmly. "You're my mother. You're not an employee living here out of obligation. You're part of this family." Robert appeared at the kitchen entrance at that moment, having overheard the conversation. For the past few days he had kept his distance, still processing his own guilt, and trying to understand what his role would be in this new family configuration. "Michael's right," Robert said, surprising everyone. "Mary, you should have had a proper room a long time ago. That was another one of my mistakes." Mary looked between Michael and Robert, clearly torn between accepting the offer and staying in the place she had known for years. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "For so long I was just the person who took care of the house. I don't know how to be part of the family." Michael approached her, taking her hands gently. "We'll learn together. I don't know how to be your son. After all these years either." Claire watched the interaction with a sad smile. It was beautiful to see Michael trying to fix things, but she could tell the process would be much more complicated than anyone imagined. "Robert," Michael said, turning to his adoptive father, "I need you to understand something. You're not my only parent anymore. I want my mother to have a say in decisions about my life." Robert nodded, though it was clear the idea made him uncomfortable. He had controlled every aspect of Michael's life for years, and sharing that authority would be a challenge. "Of course," Robert said, "Mary has every right to have a say in your life. And one more thing," Michael continued, his voice growing firmer. "I don't want her working as a housekeeper in this house anymore." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Mary paled, clearly worried. "Michael, I need to work," she said nervously. "I don't have any other financial resources." "You don't need to support yourself," Michael replied. "I'm going to take care of you now." "Michael," Robert intervened, "maybe we should discuss this more calmly." "There's nothing to discuss," Michael cut in. "She spent 13 years working in this house while secretly taking care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of her." Mary started to cry, a mixture of gratitude and fear on her face. "Son, I don't know how to live without working. It's all I know how to do." "Then you can do other things," Claire suggested gently. "You can learn new things, have hobbies, travel if you want." "Travel?" Mary laughed through her tears. "I've never even left New York in my life." Michael felt another stab of guilt. His mother had spent her entire life limited by the need to work and care for him, never having the opportunity to explore the world or discover her own passions. "We can travel together," Michael said impulsively. "Is there anywhere specific you've always wanted to go?" Mary was silent for a moment, clearly surprised by the question. No one had ever been interested in her wishes or dreams before. I've always dreamed of seeing the ocean," she admitted shyly. "I've never seen the real ocean." "Then we'll go to the beach," Michael said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "We can go next weekend." Robert watched the interaction with conflicting feelings. It was comforting to see Michael trying to rebuild his relationship with Mary, but he also felt excluded, as if he were losing the son he had raised. At that moment, the house phone rang. Claire answered, spoke briefly, and then turned to Robert with a worried expression. "Dad, it's Dr. Matthews, your cardiologist. He wants to schedule an urgent appointment." Robert frowned. "Urgent? But I just had all my routine tests." "He said he needs to discuss the results with you in person." A chill went through Robert's stomach. At 52, he had always prided himself on his impeccable health, maintained through regular exercise and frequent medical checkups. "I'll call him back and schedule it for tomorrow," Robert said, trying to sound casual. Michael noticed the tension in Robert's voice and felt an unexpected pang of concern. Despite all the anger and resentment over the years of lies, Robert was still the only father figure he had ever known. "Dad," Michael said, "do you want me to go with you to the appointment?" Robert looked at Michael in surprise. After weeks of tension and accusations, that offer of support was unexpected. "You'd do that, even after everything?" "You may have made terrible decisions about my life," Michael replied, "but you're still my father too, and families support each other in difficult times." Mary watched the interaction between Michael and Robert with a complex expression. She could see that, despite all the pain caused by Robert's lies, there was still real love between the adoptive father and son. "Michael," she said softly, "you're becoming a very good man." "I'm trying," Michael replied. "I have a lot to make up for." Claire came over and hugged her brother. "I'm proud of you. Mom would be too." The mention of Michael and Claire's adoptive mother brought a new dimension to the situation. Isabella Miller had passed away when Michael was 13 and Claire was 11, leaving Robert a widower responsible for 2 children. It was around that time that Mary had shown up with her own 5-year-old son, seeking help. "Do you think that Isabella would have approved of what Dad did?" Michael asked, struggling to find a way to refer to the woman he had considered his mother for 8 years. "Mom was a very fair person," Claire said thoughtfully. "I think she would have understood why Dad wanted to help, but she wouldn't have agreed with the lies. Isabella always said that the truth, even when painful, was better than any lie," Robert added sadly. "She would have insisted that Michael know who Mary really was from the beginning." "So she would have liked my Mary?" Michael asked, correcting himself mid-sentence. "I'm sure of it," Robert replied. "Isabella always wanted this house to be a place of love and acceptance. Mary brought a lot of love here, even though she had to hide it." Mary blushed at the comment, still not used to being seen as part of the family instead of just an employee. The rest of the day passed in a strange atmosphere of forced normalcy. Michael helped Mary move into one of the guest rooms. Claire reorganized the household dynamics so Mary no longer had to perform cleaning duties, and Robert isolated himself in his office, clearly worried about the next day's doctor's appointment. At dinner, the 4 of them sat at the dining room table, something that had never happened with Mary before. She seemed uncomfortable in the position of a guest rather than a servant, but Michael and Claire did their best to include her in the conversations. "Mom," Michael said during the meal, "tell me about your family. Do I have siblings, grandparents?" Mary hesitated before answering, clearly touched by Michael's genuine interest in her personal life. "My parents passed away when I was young," she said, "but you have an aunt, my younger sister, who lives in Kentucky. She doesn't even know I had a son." "Why?" "Because I was ashamed. I got pregnant very young, without being married. Back then, that was a great source of dishonor for a family." Michael felt another layer of guilt add to the weight he already carried. His mother had faced not only financial hardship, but also social judgment and family isolation. "I'd like to meet her," Michael said. "My aunt." Mary's eyes filled with tears again. "You really would?" "Of course. She's my family too." At that moment, Robert stood up abruptly from the table, muttering an excuse about important work in his office. Everyone realized he was struggling with the changes happening in the family he had controlled for so long. After dinner, Michael found Robert in his office, typing furiously at his computer. "Dad, are you okay?" Robert stopped typing and looked at Michael. "I'm trying to be, but I feel like I'm losing you to a life I tried to protect you from." "You're not losing me," Michael said, sitting in the armchair across from the desk. "You're letting me be who I really am." "And what if who you really are doesn't include a place for me?" Michael considered the question carefully before answering. Dad, you raised me. You gave me an education, opportunities, love. That doesn't go away just because I also have my biological mother in my life now. Robert nodded, but Michael could see the insecurity was still there. Just promise you won't shut me out completely, Robert pleaded. I know I made terrible mistakes, but you're still my son, too. You're going to have to learn to share, Michael said honestly. But yes, you're still my father. That night, as the house finally quieted down, Michael looked out his bedroom window at the garden where it had all begun 2 weeks ago. The scene of Claire helping Mary after the vase accident seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. Now everything had changed, and they were just beginning to figure out what it would be like to live as a real family, not one based on lies and artificial hierarchies. The doctor's appointment was scheduled for the next morning. Robert barely slept, tossing and turning as his mind created increasingly dark scenarios about what Dr. Matthews might want to discuss in person. Michael knocked on Robert's bedroom door at 7 in the morning, already dressed and ready to go with him. Dad, are you ready? Robert opened the door, clearly nervous. Michael, are you sure you want to go? It might be serious, I know, Michael interrupted. That's exactly why. I'm not letting you face this alone. During the drive to the doctor's office, the two remained silent. Robert drove with his hands tense on the steering wheel, while Michael looked out the window, thinking how ironic it would be if he lost Robert just as they were starting to rebuild their relationship. Dr. Matthews was a man in his 60s, known for his directness. When they entered his office, his serious expression confirmed Robert's worst fears. Robert, thank you for coming in so quickly, the doctor said, gesturing for them to sit. I need to discuss some concerning results from your tests. Doctor, this is my son Michael. You can speak in front of him. The doctor nodded and opened a folder with test results. Robert, your cardiac exams showed some significant irregularities. You have a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a genetic disease that affects the heart muscle. Robert felt the world spin. Is it serious? It can be, if not treated properly. But the good news is we caught it early, and there are effective treatments. You'll need to make significant lifestyle changes and take specific medications. Michael held his father's hand, offering silent support. Doctor, Michael asked, is this condition really genetic? Yes, it's usually hereditary. Why do you ask? Michael and Robert looked at each other. Doctor, Michael is adopted, Robert explained. But I have a biological daughter. Should she get tested? Definitely, and any of your close relatives should be tested as well. After the appointment, father and son walked in silence to the car. Robert seemed shaken, not just by the diagnosis, but by the realization of how much time he had wasted on minor worries when life was so fragile. Michael, Robert said when they finally got in the car, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. Michael turned to look at his father, intrigued. When Mary came to me 13 years ago, she wasn't the first desperate person to ask for my help. What do you mean? Robert took a deep breath before continuing. Back then, our company received dozens of requests for help every month. Sick people, families in need, children needing expensive surgeries. It was impossible to help everyone. So why did you specifically help my mother? Because when she arrived at my office with you in her arms, I saw something in her eyes that reminded me of Isabella when she was dying. It was pure, desperate love, willing to make any sacrifice. Michael remained silent, waiting for his father to continue. But there was another reason, Michael. A reason I've never admitted, even to myself. Robert paused, clearly struggling with the words. Isabella and I tried to have more children for years after Claire was born. We had 3 miscarriages. When Isabella died, I was devastated not only by her loss, but by the family we never got to have. Michael began to understand where the conversation was going. When I saw you and Mary, I saw an opportunity to save a child and, selfishly, to complete my family. You weren't just an act of charity, Michael. You were the son I desperately wanted. The words hit Michael like a revelation. All these years he had assumed Robert had adopted him out of pity or social obligation. Dad, why did you never tell me this? because I was ashamed to admit my motives weren't entirely altruistic, and later, when I realized I was losing you because of the lies, I was afraid you'd find out that you were, in part, a way for me to heal my own pain. Michael was silent for several long minutes processing this new information. Dad, that doesn't change the fact that you separated a mother from her son. It doesn't, Robert agreed, but I hope it explains why it was so hard for me to accept sharing you with Mary. I had clung to the illusion that you were completely mine. When they got home, they found Claire and Mary in the living room, clearly anxious for news. How did it go? Claire asked immediately. Robert explained the diagnosis and the changes he would need to make. To his surprise, it was Mary who reacted with the most concern. Robert, do you need anything? I can prepare a special diet, help with the medications. Mary, you don't have to take care of me, Robert said gently. It's not your job anymore. I know, Mary replied, but despite everything, you gave my son a better life. That means something to me. At that moment, Michael realized that perhaps his family's healing wasn't just about forgiveness, but about mutual understanding. You know what? Michael said suddenly. I think we all need that trip to the beach. All of us together. All of us? Claire asked. Yes, Dad, you, Mum, me, as a family. The following weekend, the four of them were driving toward the Hamptons. It was the first time Mary had seen the ocean, and her expression of pure wonder when they arrived at the beach made everyone else smile. It's bigger than I imagined, Mary said, taking off her shoes in the sand. Michael walked with her to the water's edge, watching as she touched the ocean for the very first time. Mom, can you tell me about when I was born, about when... Things Dad never knew. Mary smiled, looking out at the horizon. You were so small when you were born. The doctors said you might not make it. But I knew you were strong. You fought to breathe from the very first day. And you fought to keep me alive. I would have given my life for you without a second thought, Mary said simply. Later, as the sun set, the four of them sat on the sand. Robert had started his medication and seemed more relaxed than he had been in weeks. Robert, Mary said suddenly, I want to thank you for something. For what? For giving Michael the chance to become the man he is today. I could never have offered him the education, the experiences, the opportunities that you did. But I also took 13 years away from the two of you, Robert replied. Yes, you did, Mary agreed, but you also made sure he survived and thrived. As a mother, that's what matters most. Michael looked between Robert and Mary, seeing for the first time two people who, despite all the mistakes and pain, truly cared about his well-being. You know what I think, Claire said, breaking the silence. I think maybe there's no such thing as a perfect family, just families that learn to love each other despite their imperfections. Claire's right, Michael said. We can't change the past, but we can decide who we want to be from now on. He turned to Robert. Dad, I forgive you for the lies. I understand now why you did what you did, even if it was wrong. Then he turned to Mary. Mom, thank you for loving me enough to let me go when you thought it was best for me, and thank you for never giving up, even when I didn't deserve your love. Finally, he looked at Claire. And thank you for always seeing the best in me, even when I was being terrible. As the stars began to appear in the sky, they built a bonfire on the beach. Robert told stories about Isabella and how she would have loved to meet Mary. Mary sang the lullabies she used to sing to Michael when he was a baby. Claire made plans to take Mary to see the world beyond New York. There's something I want to propose, Robert said as the night grew late. Mary, I want to formally adopt you too, not as an employee who became family, but as my legal sister, so that you have all the rights and protections you should have had from the beginning. Mary was speechless, tears streaming down her face. And one more thing, Robert continued, looking at Michael. I want you to officially change your name. It doesn't have to be just Michael Miller. It can be Michael Johnson Miller, honoring both your biological mother and the family that raised you. Michael hugged Robert, then Mary, then Claire. For the first time in his life, he felt like he completely belonged somewhere. 6 months later, the mansion on the Upper East Side had completely transformed. Mary had enrolled in an adult literacy program and was learning to read fluently. Michael had changed careers, leaving the family business to work for a non-profit that helped single mothers in vulnerable situations. Claire had finished her master's degree in psychology and started working in family therapy. Robert, strictly following his medical treatment and with a new understanding of his priorities, had restructured the company to focus on social impact projects. The dining table, once a symbol of hierarchy and distance, now brought together 4 people every night who had learned that family isn't about perfection, but about choosing to love one another every day. And when Michael looked out the window of the office where it had all begun, he no longer saw a shocking scene of social inequality. He saw the garden where his sister had shown that kindness and compassion can change entire destinies, where a broken family had found its way back to love, and where the most painful lies had been transformed into the most liberating truths. The broken vase was never replaced. In its place, Mary planted a rose garden that bloomed magnificently every spring, reminding everyone that from the most devastating destruction can emerge the most unexpected beauty.